We don't think about who has shown us these images, but we look at what is being depicted. The wrong that is being done with disclosing private sexual images of someone is really, really minimized. The impact of this really cannot be overestimated. It's incredibly harmful. Images are a way in which we communicate with others, in which we relate to others. And if you're seen by someone, whether or not that is a fake image, you have been seen.
You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast that showcases the work being conducted at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law in Freiburg, Germany. My name is Christopher Murphy, and I'll be talking to researchers from the fields of criminology, psychology and law. All this and more on Doing Time, Talking Crime. Well, welcome back to another episode of Doing Time, Talking Crime. This is actually the first episode, English-speaking episode of 2025, and I'd like to thank all those who've been there from the beginning. I think it's almost 4 years old now, the podcast, so thank you very much for your continued support, and for those of you who might be joining us for the very first time, welcome aboard. I also wanted to do a little shout out to a very important person who's behind the scenes, and that's Ingo Rao. Ingo is our sound engineer and the purveyor of excellent coffee, and he's been instrumental from the get-go, helping us out with the podcast. He's stuck around with us for the 4 years. I very much look forward to having him for the next 4 years. And so, Ingo, thank you very much. We've seen the podcast go from strength to strength. Right, so let's get down to business, though. And today's topic is deeply concerning. We're going to be covering an issue which is image-based sexual abuse. Now, this is also referred to as IBSA. IBSA involves the non-consensual recording, sharing, or distribution of private sexual images and videos. This is clearly a violation and one that can have devastating consequences. To help us understand this concept of IBSA, to talk more about where we're at the moment, what can be done in the future, I'm joined today by Marthe Goudsmit Samaritter. Marthe is a postdoctoral researcher at our institute, and she's published numerous articles on IBSA and has kindly offered to come onto the show today to talk us through some of the legal, ethical and social dimensions of this crime. Marthe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, we have got a number of questions for you, so we'll get right down to it. But I gave a very brief introduction there to IBSA, but maybe you can explain in a little more detail what image-based sexual abuse is.
Sure. I think you've captured really well what the definition of the issue is. So image-based sexual abuse is defined as the non-consensual taking, making, and or sharing of private sexual images, sometimes described as intimate images. And what it comes down to is that people will have been depicted in an image or a video. I use the word images to refer to both types, in a way that they would not typically be seen by others. And it will have some sexual components. So it could be either a state of undress, or it could be depicted in the middle of a sexual act. Where those are shared with others, I think it's most clear to all of us that that is a clear violation of your privacy, because others now have access to you depicted in a sexual way, and that's not the side of yourself that you would typically show to everyone. But even when they're made without your consent, one example is filming in a dressing room, for instance, that is experienced as a real violation. And even if they're not inherently sexual, the fact that they're recorded and taken and even exist as naked images of you, that sexualizes the content of them. So someone who's filmed in a dressing room might not have considered that to be a sexual thing for them to be in that dressing room, and nevertheless, the image that was taken without their consent would be considered a sexual image, especially if it's published on a pornography website, but even just its existence. One thing that I just want to note is that we call it image-based sexual abuse, and I think we should call it image-based sexual abuse, but it has not always been referred to by that term. It historically has also sometimes been referred to as revenge porn, and that is something that we've moved away from because it does not really capture the issue. Revenge suggests that there is a particular motive that the defendant had. It also suggests that the victim might have done something to deserve whatever happened to them. And on the other hand, the word pornography, certainly in its everyday use, does not convey that what you're looking at is abusive. Now, you could make an argument that pornography is also inherently abusive. But if you refer to something as pornography, to most people, I don't think that comes across as being a reference to abusive materials. So the term image-based sexual abuse much more clearly captures that it is a form of sexual abuse that is image-based, regardless of the defendant's motive. And I think that's really important to stick with that language. So I'm glad that we're doing that now.
Yeah,
but I just wanted to...
Okay. No, absolutely. That's because that was actually what I was going to ask a little bit about. The second question was maybe how some of the most common ways that people could experience image-based sexual abuse. But as you've just already answered in a way, that there are many, many ways that one, from the concept of, which is no longer used, revenge porn, but also, so in a dressing room, completely unawares that they may even be filmed.
Right. So I think that's where the word revenge porn is inspired by this idea of the former partner disclosing sexual images that were consensually made in the course of a relationship to take revenge or to pressure their partner to come back or something along those lines. But as you see, and some examples I've given, there are many different ways in which someone might be victimized. And it's not even necessary that there is a relationship between the victim and the defendant. It might be a complete stranger. There might be some sort of computer break-in. Images might be taken in secret. Images might be faked. So there's so many different ways in which a person could be a victim of image-based sexual abuse. So
it's probably not possible to encapsulate all the different ways that image-based sexual abuse can then occur. But as you say, what's important is that these are images taken against someone's consent and that they are then being spread generally online.
Right. But even some images taken with consent,
okay.
But shared without consent,
yes,
would fall within my understanding of the term.
Okay. Is IBSA a byproduct of the internet age, or did it exist prior to the internet?
That's a really interesting question. I think it has always existed. There are actually quite a few ancient examples, but the most well-known examples of more recent times are from the 80s, where pornography magazines would invite their readers to submit images of people they knew, or at least images that they had access to, that had some content that would be appropriate for a pornography magazine without the consent of the people depicted in it. So quite literally the definition of image-based sexual abuse. Even in the sort of early 2010s, where the internet was definitely around, but not as all-encompassing as it is now, there was a mix between digital and analog image-based sexual abuse. One example that I'm aware of is where in secondary schools, images were printed off and then put in lockers. So they were digital images, but shared in real life. And now, of course, with the internet, the sharing of the images is so much easier than it's ever been, and therefore has become a much more all-encompassing infringement on whoever is in the images. And it's much harder to escape. You can imagine that a magazine in the 80s, it will have had a run, it will have been sold for a while, and then all copies were sold out and the copies were eventually thrown out, and the image is virtually not out there anymore. But now that doesn't happen anymore. As soon as an image has been published online, it could stay there forever. And there are ways to get rid of it, but it's also very easy for others to re-upload them if they wanted to.
That's right. It's very, as you say, very, very difficult then once it's online to keep it offline. We'll come back to a little bit to that later on, talking about what lawyers and politics can maybe do to try and make it easier for the internet, if you will, to forget things. But I imagine it's not that straightforward. But so if we say, though, that, okay, there was a time where IBSA was analog, where it was occurred in magazines, American pornography magazines and the like, but then you say there's been a slow switch then over to now the digital sphere.
That's right.
Okay, because that's where in researching for this episode, I look around on the internet, obviously. What I kept coming across was what seemed to be this watershed moment when dealing with or experiencing and dealing with image-based sexual abuse was the 2014 celebrity nude photo leak, where I believe hackers had accessed, as you said, private images that were stored on computers or in the cloud from numerous celebrities, and then felt, okay, I'm going to share these with the world on Reddit, on Facebook, and various other platforms. Why was this leak then considered to be such a watershed moment?
You're quite right to suggest that it was considered a watershed moment. And I think one of the reasons for that is that it really was the first time that we saw such a large-scale, worldwide case of image-based sexual abuse. And it was something, because there were well over 100 celebrities who were the victim of this, everyone was talking about it. It was everywhere. And it was discussed in the most bizarre ways. One was conversations that I remember, because this was also where my own interest in the topic started, is two friends of mine who have now since changed their mind. I think that's probably the reason why we're still friends. Had argued that there was nothing wrong with looking at these images because they were already out there, in the sense that the harm has been done, so what does it matter if I see them too? And I found that a really difficult question to answer at the time. It's actually what my doctoral work ended up answering 10 years later. Yes. So it did take a while to come up with
the question. Obviously sat with you to think, why is this? Or
so what about it is so wrong?
Yeah.
Exactly. What about it is so wrong that we shouldn't look at it? But the other thing that really caused this to be the watershed moment, as you called it, is that for the first time, the people depicted in these images were also speaking out against it. They were saying this was a sexual assault on me. Whereas previously, when celebrities have been victimized, it had happened before. From 2011 until 2014, there's 3 instances that you can recognize an attitude. So initially, the attitude was that people were made to apologise by their managers, to say that it had been a mistaken judgment to have had these images of themselves anyway. So the depicted person, the victim,
person had to apologise.
Yes. And that's not very long ago. Like that's
right.
Around 2010, people were made to apologise.
Ago, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And then a couple of years later, someone took the attitude and said, well, I know I look great in these images and it doesn't harm me. That person has since come back from this. Actually, that was a deeply humiliating experience for me. So that was.
It doesn't harm me that these images are out there. I look good in these images.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So that was an attitude.
Different
yes,
attitude.
But they've since said that actually it was deeply harmful. So that's something that I suspected was the case, that it was actually deeply harmful for them, but they were trying to distance themselves from the harm that they'd experienced. And then in 2014, people saying, no, this was a very serious violation of me. This was a very serious offence and it should be treated as a sexual offence, and whoever did this to me is the one in the wrong, not me.
Okay, so there's been an evolution in the way even people who are subject to image-based sexual abuse react to it online.
That's right.
Okay, but just these 2 instances previously, were they single people who were then involved, or were these major leaks as well?
These were all single cases. Yeah. So that's the scale of the 2014 event definitely made a massive impact, both on regular people talking about it, but also legislators talking about it and celebrities speaking up against it.
Right, okay. But then if we talk about regular people, and you also had that conversation with your 2 friends there, and that's what, generally if you Google for the 2014 celebrity nude photo leak, you don't come across that title, you come across the title The Fappening, which is a mix then between a happening and to fap or to masturbate. So internet slang for masturbation. So we have this massive sexual abuse scandal that's happened, and everyone simply, well, not everyone, that's wrong, but a lot of people are simply referring it to as the fappening, and this is some great event. People should get together. It's jovial. Hey, look at these stars. Their intimate moments have been leaked on the internet. Serves them right. And there didn't actually seem to be any real acknowledgement, and certainly in a lot of sectors, that this was a crime with victims. It was seen as kind of a victimless crime. And what would you say about the way that this referred to as the fappening and this trivialisation of the event feeds into common myths then about the misconceptions about IBSA?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the things that was really clear in the use of that term is that if you have these images of yourself, you basically deserve this, and there's no privacy that you're entitled to, especially if you're a famous person. Then we give ourselves the right to look at every material that is available of you, whether you wanted that to be out there or not. Especially with image-based sexual abuse, and in the early days, I'm hoping it's getting a little bit less. The attitude was very much that victims needed to protect themselves against this by not having sexual images of themselves taken. So that is most relevant in the context of image-based sexual abuse, where it is committed with images that were taken with consent.
Consensually taken images, then shared without consent. Yes.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So people who were subjected to image-based sexual abuse, like the example of being filmed in a dressing room, were not as much subject to this type of victim blaming. But people who had consented to having sexual images of themselves were very much subjected to it. And the interesting thing is that for some reason, having sexual images of yourselves is not considered as a part of someone's sex life. Mm-hmm. What someone does in the course of their sex lives is typically left to them.
Correct.
I don't ask any questions.
Right.
Like, as long as it's within the scope of the law, have fun. Mm-hmm. And this should be part of that. But for some reason, when it comes to these images, we don't look at what the reason is why we have access to them. What I mean is, we don't think about who has shown us these images, but we look at what is being depicted without any hesitation. I say we, I've never actually looked at them, but I think that's why this happens on such a large scale, is that there are people who are either just seeking out images that they enjoy looking at, or even actively seeking out images that were disclosed without consent. So that's even maybe a little bit more disturbing. But just to get back to the terminology of the fappening and the sort of ease with which people give themselves access to it, the wrong that is being done with disclosing private sexual images of someone is really, really minimised. And where victims dare speak up, first of all, a lot more attention is being drawn to their images. So many more people will actually go and see those images. But they're also partly blamed for what's happening to them. And that, unfortunately, still happens sometimes. It wasn't just people who knew that FAP is an internet slang for masturbation. I think maybe people were aware of it, but it was just called that. Everyone was referring to it.
I noticed in mainstream media, it was
Bizarrely,
the fappening.
Yes.
It definitely wasn't the nude. Maybe to begin with, for a week or two, it was the nude celebrity photo leak, and then it just became the fappening. Yeah. Which, as I say, seemed to be this major trivialisation of what was going on and the people involved. But it is interesting. I mean, that's definitely another topic for another day. But whether it affected hundreds of normal people, let's say, not celebrities, how things would have played out then. But I mean, it was definitely positive that those, or certainly a large number of those celebrities then took to the stand and fought back and said, no, this is not happening with me. This is not okay.
Yeah. And the thing that happens when it's normal people is that, let's say, and this does happen, unfortunately, someone is victimized and I don't know them and I have no relationship to them whatsoever. The chances of me coming across that image are very, very slim. But if someone actively seeks out to victimize them, they might very well seek out every member of their community or as many people they can find and share these images with them. Okay. So to private people who do not have a reputation publicly beyond their own community, being a victim of image-based sexual abuse can be much more all-encompassing than to someone who does have a public reputation. But for private people, there are people that are genuinely only known as, oh yes, you were that person who had their images disclosed. Like someone might say, as I said about the school incident where images were being put in lockers, the woman who that happened to, at the time a girl, is still known in that community as the girl who that happened to.
Wow. Okay.
And that will never go away because she doesn't have the reputation. The reputation is not the right word.
The ability or the Teflon maybe to. That's right, because that's as I say. There's someone like Jennifer Lawrence who started in the Hunger Games, and she obviously has a massive support network that she can rely on, she can use, and that's right. People invariably will not remember her. I will certainly hope not due to the fappening, but rather through her film roles. Right. Whereas, as you say, someone who maybe is victimised in their hometown in a smaller circle of friends, then it's very difficult to escape. And I can imagine it can lead to some serious consequences as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Marthe, thank you so much for giving us that little introduction there to IBSA. And we've talked now about the 2014 celebrity photo leak. We're going to take a very short break. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about another deeply concerning and troubling field, which is deep fake pornography. You're listening to Doing Time, Talking Crime, a podcast by the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Crime, Security and Law. Welcome back to Doing Time, Talking Crime. I'm joined today by Marthe Goudsmit Samaritter, and we are talking all about image-based sexual abuse. So, Marthe, before the break, we talked about the 2014 celebrity nude photo leak, the so-called fappening, which was definitely troubling, showed kind of where things were going with the internet, but I was reading some recent articles which are even more troubling, to be honest, because what's happening now with artificial intelligence and the creation of deep fake pornography. Its worst form, these are AI-generated images where we're taking someone's face, which could be from anywhere. We found this face, we've taken it from a social media post, from our own private photos, and we're now putting it onto the body of someone who's involved in sexual degrading, any kind of basically position where this other person, the person's face, would not have been. So we're combining a face with a body, often using artificial intelligence. And the scary part, obviously, is that these deep fakes, almost real or extremely difficult for anyone to tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. I want to ask you, is there anything one can even do to stop falling victim to this kind of new form of IBSA?
That's not the most cheerful answer on my part, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I have the most optimistic answer to that question, in the sense that, as you say, any image of someone's face could be used and superimposed on a pornographic image, on a sexual image, on a degrading image. And it could result in a very real-looking image of them. And because any image will do, anyone who has any online presence that includes a picture of their face is vulnerable to this. And unfortunately, you really cannot stop this from happening to yourself, in the sense that, like I said, if there is an image of you online available, you can become a victim to this offence. And anyone can do that. And there are free apps available to anyone who can give you a very basic form. That could be, you input an image of someone fully clothed, and the app will give you an estimation of what that person will look like naked. Just as an aside, these apps typically only work on women. So the database that they've been trained on, in terms of, it's a computer algorithm, so it essentially calculates what a person that would look like this clothed would look like this naked, and it needs a lot of images of people that are naked in order to be able to determine what someone does look like naked or would look like naked. And the images that it has access to, so the images that it's been trained on, tend to be images of women exclusively. To the extent that if a picture of a man was uploaded in some of these apps, it would give you a naked woman's body attached to what was clearly a man's face. Even the more advanced technologies are increasingly accessible. Some people sell their skills online. There's also plenty of people who have just learned how to do it. And then you can get much more than just a still image of someone apparently naked. You could enter them into a fully pornographic film.
Yeah, simply with a face, a still image, you could then, if you have the skills or the know-how or are willing to attain or acquire through whatever means, you could actually, you could basically turn that into a film.
That's right.
Yeah.
The more images of you that are out there, the more realistic that result will be.
Danger you're in.
Yeah. Well, you see, the more danger you're in, that makes it sound as though you can protect yourself from this by making sure that there is fewer images of you. And I'm just wanting to avoid suggesting that people who have many images of themselves out there were somehow taking a risk.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Because that would be, not that that's what you're suggesting. I'm just wanting to make sure that we have that clear.
Yeah.
It is not on people to go about their daily lives as we all do, and then be told afterwards, well, if there had been fewer images of you out there, then this could not have happened to you as easily.
This would be going back to the...
That would be going back to
the
victim
2014
blaming
leak there as well, with the, these images shouldn't have been there in the first place, which is obviously...
Which is silly, especially with the types of images that are being abused now, in the sense that they're very normal images. It could be your social media profile pictures. They're very normal. Like, you're happy for everyone to see those images. That's why they're your profile picture.
They're not in no way sexual whatsoever. And I think that's the scary thing. Rather, these are being completely then turned in without consent, but it does something absolutely different.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, that was the article I read, which kind of got me thinking about this beforehand. It was a case in Australia where a lady had said that, it was a colleague of hers who she trusted and knew, and in the end he had been taking all these social media images and created an internet site basically where she was shown in really degrading pornography, and had one shared this with a group of people, adding to the impact and damage and suffering caused. But two, as she said, it was this violation that she felt all these happy images that she had taken of her in front of the new house, her with the family, new baby, had been completely taken out of their context and turned into this deepfake pornography. And she said this destroyed those memories for me in my life.
The impact of this really cannot be overestimated. It's incredibly harmful to people who are subjected to image-based sexual abuse. And one thing that I just want to point out is that the research that has been done on the harmfulness of image-based sexual abuse suggests that there really isn't much of a difference between the harmfulness of deepfake pornography compared to image-based sexual abuse that is committed with genuine images. So to the victim, it is as harmful to have deepfake images of themselves disclosed as it is to have been subjected to image-based sexual abuse with genuine images. And there are various reasons for that. I think they're mostly grounded in the fact that images are a way in which we communicate with others, in which we relate to others. And if you're seen by someone, whether or not that is a fake image, you have been seen that
That's
way.
right, yeah.
So those sexual images are imprinted on everyone's mind. And if you don't normally show yourself to them in a sexual way, then that is a deep violation of your relationship with them. But if you recognize the original images, of course, there's this added layer of not only is the relationship with the person who has seen these images affected, but also your own history and memories.
That's right. You're not going to be looking at that
so
image anymore with you walking a dog on the beach.
Right.
That's right. Your face is somewhere else now. And yeah.
The reason I want to draw attention to the level of harm is that one thing that does still happen to victims of deepfake image-based sexual abuse is that they're told, but these are fake images. They're fake. You know that they're fake. Why does it bother you so much that they're there? And it's not because it matters to people whether or not they're actually depicted. They're seen as being depicted. And I think that is what images do.
That's right. That was actually, in this case, they talked about that. The lady in question who went to the police, and they were also, well, but it's not you, you know. This was, I mean, it's not that the police are doing a bad job, but they probably don't know either what to do with this because it's new and because it's a field that maybe we're unfortunately just getting into, and so we don't know where it's going to be taking us. But she had to actually get private companies and pay money to try and track these down and to work out where they were coming from to shut them down, and an odyssey, obviously, yeah. But that then maybe brings me then to the question of law and politics. So if we say that these images, we need to think, how can we progress here? I mean, clearly what you've painted is a fairly worrying picture. Not that you're not a depressing guest by any means, but it is a depressing topic, and it's horrible to talk about and to think about what people suffer on a daily basis. But so what can the law, what can politicians do, if anything, to try and stop? I'm saying I don't think they can probably stop IBSA, but maybe they can kind of curtail the spread and to make sure things are maybe taken down quicker. And is this a question, it's always a question with the internet, is this something that needs to be done internationally, or is it something that needs to be done nationally?
Those are all excellent questions. The first thing I want to note is that since 2014, so since this event that we've been discussing happened, since 2014, the law on image-based sexual abuse has changed in quite a few countries, but it's only like 24. Before 2014, it was maybe 5 countries where forms of image-based sexual abuse were criminalised, and now it's closer to 25.
So criminalised then being the one who takes the image and uploads it or shares it, or being the initial violator, so to say? Yeah.
Yes, so the criminalisation typically refers to the person who either took the image without consent or shared the image without consent. And I'm not sure that I know any examples of resharing as an offence.
That would be my question, yeah.
That I think would still be a good idea. Mm-hmm. The issue would be that you'd have to prove that the person knew that the image is right. But if we look at it on a theoretical level, I think it would be a good idea to also criminalise the act of re-uploading images that were on the first occasion, disclosed without consent, for instance.
That were known then to be
Images of
IBSA, and then re-uploading these then.
That's right,
Yes. Okay.
yes. Because there are some laws in place, we can make a little bit of a comparison of what works. In the Netherlands, a law was adopted that criminalised the non-consensual taking, making and sharing of private sexual images, but it did not specify that that also included deepfake pornography. And a couple of years ago, there was a Dutch journalist who had been subjected to deepfake pornography who went to the police and wanted to report the crime of image-based sexual abuse. And the police suggested that maybe that was the wrong offence to come and bring to them, and instead it should be defamation, which is a criminal offence in the Netherlands. Right. And that is the position that the legislature had taken in 2014, that image-based sexual abuse needs no further criminalisation. It is a criminal offence under defamation. That is wrong. That is just, it completely misses the point.
It's a stain on your character, it's defamation.
Exactly.
That's right.
So it completely misses the point of what is wrong about image-based sexual abuse to say that it is an act of defamation. That position was abandoned when the new law was adopted, which entered into force in 2020, so quite a few years later. But still, in legal terms, that was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, yes, okay, they realised that they were drawing too long a bow there.
And despite this new law existing, the police suggested that she should file a complaint or file a report for defamation instead of image-based sexual abuse. Fortunately, she did not. Her case was the one that then clarified Dutch law, where the judge had opportunity to say, no, this law also encompasses deepfake pornography. But that happened in a situation where there was already quite a solid law in place. So the Dutch law was since clarified. Deepfake pornography is also a criminal offence. That is a rare situation. Most countries do not criminalise deepfake pornography at all. If you look at the German law, for instance, there is quite substantial privacy offences, but nothing specifically dedicated to image-based sexual abuse. And it certainly isn't clear that a fake image would be covered by those privacy offences.
So that's certainly the issue, is the fakeness of the image, so to say, that's with deepfake pornography at least.
That would certainly be an issue, yes. Yeah. So the laws that are in existence in Germany are already used in a very limited way to address image-based sexual abuse, but they do cover them. So image-based sexual abuse can be prosecuted. It doesn't happen much, but it can.
Okay.
With genuine images.
But that would be with genuine images.
That's right.
But as you said before, the images, be they genuine or fake, you said are found under those who have suffered, equally as harmful.
That's right.
Yeah.
And my point is that even in jurisdictions where there are very clear laws in place that say image-based sexual abuse is a criminal offence, there is a lot of back and forth about whether that includes deepfake pornography, let alone jurisdictions where there actually isn't a dedicated image-based sexual abuse offence, where the question is one about a privacy violation, and then you'd have to make the argument that deepfake pornography is a privacy violation. I think you can make that argument. I think you can make that argument very well. But it would be a novel type of argument, and novel arguments are always a risk to rely on when you go to court.
Yes, and it has to, as you say, have someone there with the financial backing and the intestinal fortitude to go through with this to be brought out into the public again. That's right, you're being dragged through the muck again.
The effect that going through the criminal justice process has on victims is potentially very severe. So even going to the police and filing a report and then having to go and deliver testimony and all those things has a very serious effect on victims. So add to that it's not a given that the case will be decided in their favour, or at least against their defendant.
That's right.
That's a very long-winded answer.
But it's important.
The law needs to improve. There is a lot of scope for improvement, not just in Germany, across the board, and I think also in the Netherlands, even though I think that's one example where there is a more solid law in place. What needs to be addressed is the non-consensual taking, making, sharing of private sexual images, regardless of whether these are genuine images, regardless of the defendant's motive. And the reason why I bring that up is that there have been criminal offences. England and Wales was an example of that, where in the past, image-based sexual abuse was criminalised only if the defendant had the intent to cause the victim distress, which is very much focused on the defendant's motive, which seems informed by this revenge motive that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
And that excludes a lot of forms of image-based sexual abuse from criminalisation, means that they're simply not criminal offences. And one reason why the legislature would go for the intent to cause distress is that you want to make very sure that you don't accidentally criminalise someone or someone's behaviour who did it accidentally. My cat walked over my keyboard and now I've uploaded this image. You want to avoid that being a criminal offence. The chances of that happening are very slim, but that needs to not be criminalised. But there are other ways to do this. So I think one way that I suggested is to have a double sort of intention, so the double mens rea requirement as the mental element of a criminal offence. So you need to have the intention to, for instance, publish his image, and you need to have been negligent as to whether there was consent for your publication. So then you sort of catch this accidental upload as there was no intentional publication, so this person hasn't committed a crime. But you also avoid limiting the offence to something that is excluding a lot of image-based sexual abuse from the offence.
But it sounds like the laws are definitely doing more of a catch-up than anything else there. Yeah.
And your second point, they're all national efforts. So ideally what we'd have is some international treaty that suggests that this is something that needs to be addressed in all countries. Yeah. Because if you're a victim in Germany, everyone anywhere can see you.
That's it, exactly, those images, and that's the whole thing with the internet, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I see. Okay. So that's what we would ideally have would be an international solution, but I'm going to ask on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the likelihood is that we would find an international solution? It
hasn't happened yet, but we do have treaties, generally, international treaties that I would have thought were impossible too. So
yeah, true.
Let's not rule it out.
Let's not rule it out. That's right. And as you say, I mean, defamation is obviously not the right way to go, but I'm guessing defamation in one country can be prosecuted possibly in another country. So there's options there for cross-border jurisdiction and the like. I say when it's not defamation, it's something far worse, but maybe there are ideas where, at least within Europe, it would be a good starting point, right, to...
Well, you might also say that the international efforts that take place need not be specifically dedicated to criminalisation and more to if someone has a picture of themselves online that they want to not have online, there are international efforts to make sure that everyone can always have their images removed, regardless of whether that was a criminal offence. There need to be safeguards so that I don't go around removing everyone else's images from the internet. But it could also be much more focused on, we don't know who the offender was, we don't know who committed these crimes, we don't know who keeps sharing these images, but we do know who's in the picture, and so we can at least protect them. So I think that might be more realistic international efforts than coming up with a crime that applies in every single country across the world.
Well, that, I mean, what you touch on there is where I wanted to go with my next question then would be about technological efforts and what one could do working with companies. I think that's the only way it's going to work, with companies hand in hand, with politicians, with policymakers, with lawyers and with companies. Are there promising technological solutions to kind of combat all these bad technological breakthroughs, if you will, about what's happening, for instance, in the deepfake porn area?
One approach that has been adopted by some social media platforms, for instance, Meta at some point did this, where you could send them your images and then they would make sure that those would not be able to be shared on their platforms.
Okay, so they would have a technological solution to make sure the images that you're sent are deleted and not shared.
Right. Okay. There was quite a bit to do about that because that involved you sending your private images to Facebook so that they could then prevent them resurfacing. That does not necessarily make people feel safer.
Threshold that one has to go across,
There are increasing technologies available that means that if you cut out part of a photo, where you could say, this is what my hand looked like in this photo, and I'll just send you the part of my hand. But every image that you come across where my hand looks exactly the way it does here has also a sexual image attached to it that I do not want to have put online, and then that could be removed. That type of technology does exist, but it's not necessarily used very widely to help find images that should not be online. If you look at how images of child sexual abuse are found and removed, that at least suggests that it can be done, but even that isn't perfect. I think a lot more of the efforts used for removing images of child sexual abuse from the internet could also be used to remove images of image-based sexual abuse with adults from the internet.
But I guess just to say the programs that are doing this are taught to pick up on child sexual abuse, whereas the difficulty here is with image-based sexual abuse of adults. They don't know what is fake, what is consensual. So you have
it does
to be...
depend on the technology. So there are technologies that say this is the specific image that you're looking for. Make sure that that image doesn't surface anywhere.
The person has to send that image in first time and say, this is me, this is fake, this is non-consensual.
That's exactly right,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there are technologies of image hashing, but there's ways around it. So they're not perfect. Image hashing involves essentially giving a code to an existing image and say you can recognize the code in the image, and then that image can't be surfaced. But if you save the image in a different format, or if you cut it a little bit, then it doesn't work anymore. So there are some efforts, but they're not necessarily the best. I think technology can help, but technology won't save us from this. I think we need much more awareness of it. This is a sexual offence, in the sense that most sexual offences aren't committed generally. Not everyone would commit sexual offences in the same way that image-based sexual abuse is being done. So there's a real misunderstanding of the nature of the type of wrong that is being committed, because the nature of the act feels so unsexual to many people when they're uploading an image. That's not a sexual act.
That's right. Or this person I don't know, or sorry, you mean someone's uploading an image onto a
pornography website?
Yes,
or
that's
in
right.
general, the act of publication is not a sexual act.
Okay.
And I think that can be confusing people with regards to the fact that that's a sexual image or is perceived as a sexual image makes it into a sexual act, or makes it at least into a sexual wrong, which would qualify it as a sexual offence. But because there's this imbalance between the nature of the act and the nature of the wrong, I think many people who commit image-based sexual abuse aren't fully aware of the type of wrong that they're committing. Of course, there are also people who deliberately seek out to commit these offences. That's not necessarily what I had in mind now. I think you can help avoid quite a bit of image-based sexual abuse by making sure that people are better educated. And that still will mean that there is image-based sexual abuse out there, because some people just seek out to commit image-based sexual abuse, but it could help avoid some of the grand scope, especially in light of how young people are when they first access or are being sent image-based sexual abuse.
Yes. What you're saying, though, is it's a societal issue as well. We have to change the way that we think about how image-based sexual abuse should be viewed and understood, and the impact that it actually can have on the victims, or the impact it does have on the victims. So we need the laws, but we also need society. We need a change in the way, and I'm guessing at schools and the like would be maybe a good place to start, right, with programs in that regard to talk about what image-based sexual abuse is and the dangers and damage that it can cause. Well, given everything we've talked about today, I'm going to try and stay positive and say, is there anything, no, that's not positive. I want to say positive and say, what gives you hope then for the future in the fight against IBSA?
I think the most hopeful thing is that we do see increasing legislative action being taken. I think it could be much more still, but clearly there is a shift being made from this is not for the legislature to regulate to an attitude that says, yes, the law does need to address these issues. Alongside that, I think there is an increasing awareness among people generally that image-based sexual abuse is wrong, and that it's not for the depicted person to solve. I think that too could be a growing awareness. And I think one thing that we need to take care of is to ensure that image-based sexual abuse doesn't become normal. And my concern there is that if children in primary schools are confronted with images of their classmates being shared amongst themselves, I worry that we have a generation of people growing up with the idea that this is just part of life, this is what happens. And that's what we need to avoid. And I think where there is an increasing awareness of image-based sexual abuse being wrong, there might also be increased efforts to make sure that children are aware that this is not normal, and that we all make sure that we don't start thinking of this as normal. But there are quite a bit of things that still need to happen to make sure that the future of image-based sexual abuse is very bright, in the sense that currently image-based sexual abuse is a very big problem, and it needs to be maybe less of one. And we're working on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that does give me a hope when you say that there are ideas there that one can do. Not everything's been exhausted yet, and it's positive. There is now an awareness, as you say. Even that's changed within the last 10, 15 years, clearly the way we view image-based sexual abuse. So, Marthe, thank you so much for coming on to the show today, for talking through a difficult topic, but an extremely important topic.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to listen to additional podcasts or learn more about our research, visit us at csl.mpg.de.